All right, good evening and welcome to tonight's Life Under the Sun, a study through the book of Ecclesiastes. It's good to see Kathy Hawkins here, even from stormy Tennessee. My wife Cassie, right downstairs, is doing well. The Hearts are here. Glad to have you guys here as well. Eric Kelly on Facebook. If you are with us, let me know. We want to hear from you. We want to know that you're here with us. Let me know that you can hear me and that you can see me. Because again, we're constantly trying to adjust to the best of our abilities to make this work as best as it can. So if I can get some sort of thumbs up that audio and video is going okay. Again, we're every week trying to tweak it a little bit here and there to make it as good as it possibly can be. And so let me know. So we have a couple of people here. Emily is saying hello from the Tuckers. So good to have them joining in tonight as well for Life Under the Sun, Wednesday night live, presented by Pioneer Baptist Church. Edwin Lugo, pastor of Pioneer Baptist Church, as it has been so far. Your host, Anita Carley. Good to see you. Cassie, thank you for the thumbs up. Okay, Eric says he can hear and see on both, and so that is good to hear. Obviously, we're here together for our every week study through the book of Ecclesiastes. We'll have some new content, a Bible study through the book of Ecclesiastes. Again, I really do appreciate you being here. I think it's going to be great. Do It Heartily, which most of you know by this point is Adam Steed. The Steeds are tuning in with us as well. And so good to see them as well. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. Now, let me say a few things. We have a couple of people who are normals on our Wednesday night that also are oftentimes contributors that aren't going to be able to be here tonight. So tonight is, again, one of those opportunities for you to really chime in to make this as profitable as it can be for as many people as possible. So get your texting fingers, typing fingers, whatever it is you're doing, however you're commenting, ready to go, because we're going to need you tonight. And tonight we're going to start off with a Would You Rather. We started Would You Rather last week, so this is the second one. This might sound a little bit morbid, and honestly, that's probably because, well, I guess it kind of is. But I want to check in here with you guys real quick and see what you think about this. Here is tonight's Would You Rather question. It is this. Would you rather know how you will die or when you will die? Now notice, neither is an option. You gotta choose one. Maybe give us the reasoning behind the one that you choose. Would you rather know how you will die or when you will die? I don't know about you. I will say for me, the first obvious answer would be neither. I don't want to know either. I don't know when. I don't want to know how. I don't know. I don't want to know when. I don't know any of those things. But in this situation, you got to choose one of them. First one in, Gabe says he would rather know when he will die rather than how he will die. Gabe, any reason why you want to choose that one? Why you choose when instead of how? Be kind of an interesting thought to think about for just a second. Would you rather know how you will die or when you will die? Cassie says when I will die so I can get as much family time as possible before I check out. So there you go. There's an answer with a reasoning. She'd like to make sure she can get as much family time in there as she can. Josiah also says when. So far we've got 3 votes for when. I don't have any votes yet for how. George Mitchell says when, so that he can get his affairs in order. When I first looked at that, I thought it said so you can go to Africa. I'm like, my goodness, man, what is there in Africa that he wants to do so badly? But to get your affairs, not Africa, to get your affairs in order. Let's see here. Eric says he would rather know when, so you better prepare them for how you will die. Let's see. Cassie, I think knowing, she said she would rather know how. Because she thinks knowing when would be too difficult. You're just constantly on your mind thinking about, all right, the day's getting closer, the day's getting closer. Adam says, I think I got to go with when. Gives more incentive to make the most of my time here. Let's see here. Gabe says he chooses when so he can do cool stuff before he dies. Anita also chimes in with when. Emily says she'd rather know how she will die. That's what I worry about most. Possibly be able to prevent the cause. We will all die eventually, and knowing when, I'd anticipate it too much. I think that's kind of what Cassie's saying. She's like, oh, it would just be always on my mind, always on my heart, and thinking about that all the time. But there are a lot of wins in here. A lot of people, I would say, let's see here. Let me do a real quick count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 wins. 1, 2 hows. 7 wins and 2 hows so far. But if you have an answer, you haven't chimed in, let us know which one you choose. Would you rather know how you'll die or when you'll die? We don't want to spend too much time thinking about that, though. Let's go on to the next segment today. If you haven't answered, you can go ahead and answer, though. This is the fact of the day. This may make some of you may resonate very much with the fact of the day. The fact of the day might make some of you a little sad. George brings up a really good point, though, by the way, about the when or the how. Life insurance, right? You can plan that just right. Although, when that happens, a lot of times the people in the know become really suspect about what just happened. Here is the fact of the day. And this is really funny because I was typing this out yesterday, and then Cassie or one of us happened to be seeing something on TV that was talking about this very subject, and it came up. So I thought it was kind of interesting. Here is today's fact of the day. Here's the fact of the day. On average, a person needs 7 minutes to fall asleep. That's it. Head hits the pillow, give them 7 minutes, and they're out. Now, let me ask you a question. How many of you say that's about right for me? How many of you say, no, it's faster than that for me? How many of you say, no way, 7 minutes isn't even close? So let's say you put your head on the bed at 11. Most of the time you're out by 11:07. On average, a person needs 7 minutes to fall asleep. Oftentimes that feels way longer when you have a baby. Emily says, what a lie. George Mitchell says, I'm on the low end, like 30 seconds. I'm more like Joe. I'm like Joe. I'm much more, as I'm reading Josiah, I'm much more like George in this one. It does not take long when my head hits the pillow to go out. Gabe says, every night is different for me. Cassie says she takes way longer. Adam says depends on the day. So a couple of you. So Emily, you say what a lie. Okay, it's a lie on what end? You say that's too short of a time, too long of a time. Which one is it? Kathy Hawkins, you say no way, not even in the ballpark. What is your ballpark? Would you say it's more like 15 minutes, 30 minutes? All of those kinds of things. Let me know what the right answer is. Okay, Anita says give me anywhere from 30 minutes to half the night. Woo! That is a long one. So Josiah also says takes me anywhere from 18 to, well, if you're on YouTube, you can see the big long time you wrote there, minutes. Kathy Hawkins says about an hour. Katie Miller says she'd rather not know either one of those things about that. I said, if you tuned in late, that's not an option. Neither is not an option. You got to choose one. I said that from the very beginning, that neither was not an option, because that neither would be probably the one we would all choose. But that is not the case for would you rather. You got to choose one or the other. So, which one's it going to be? Let's see. Emily, I'm waiting for the... Okay, Eric also says not even close. So I'm guessing those of you that say not even close, I'm guessing your time frame is much longer than what it has been. Katie says takes way longer than 7 minutes for her, more like 30 minutes to a few hours if it's a good night. Adam saying play by the rules, Katie. I got it. I know you put Kai there, Adam, but play by the rules, Katie. So let's see. Eric says half hour or longer. Okay. Anita asked how I've been sleeping these days. I've actually been sleeping pretty good. A lot of times what happens, and this has happened this week, as the weather gets a little bit nicer, I spend way more time outside. and being active, which also helps me sleep better, and that's certainly happened lately. Okay, so those of you that are, most of you are saying you're on the long end. So Emily says the same as Eric, half an hour or longer. But Emily, that's for you. What about Daniel? What about when Daniel's head hits the pillow? Because see, you might be like 30 minutes, but Daniel might be 30 seconds. And see, that starts getting us closer to that 7-minute average. On average, person needs 7 minutes to fall asleep. All right, that is the fact of the day. If you don't like it, don't argue with me. Argue with the internet. That's what the internet says. The internet is never wrong. I'm just kidding. That's just a joke. Don't take that to the bank. I'm just joking with you tonight. We are back in the book of Ecclesiastes. Today I'm transitioning here, but if you want to keep answering, you're welcome to go right ahead and do so. We're transitioning back into the book of Ecclesiastes. We finished Ecclesiastes chapter 5 last week, and really we came to a couple conclusions there. One of the major ones being that wealth or money doesn't bring satisfaction. It doesn't bring peace of mind. It doesn't bring security. It doesn't solve all of our problems. And oftentimes people have these misconceptions. And Solomon, who by the way was the richest person who ever lived, and he even says, hey, these things are not true. It will not bring complete satisfaction. It will not bring you complete peace of mind. It will not bring security. It will not solve all of your problems. That is the conclusion that Solomon came to as we ended Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Now, I know you're kidding, Katie. No worry. Katie says, you're on the internet right now, so, but she's just kidding. There's lots of trustworthy things on the internet. You just can't trust everything you see on the internet. I think you guys know what I'm saying. But today, we turn the page to Ecclesiastes chapter 6. And up to this point, Solomon has spoken about the monotony of life. He's spoken about the futility of wealth, that it doesn't get you everything that people think it will get them. And now Solomon continues to speak about the futility of life, and some of it is still connected to money. But he's really talking in Ecclesiastes chapter 6 about people spending their lives in the pursuit of something, and then when they finally accomplish it, or once they finally grasp what they've been pursuing, it doesn't fulfill them like they thought it would. It actually ends up leaving them empty. I think we talked about wealth last week doing that. But there are also other things. I've shared illustrations before about athletes who have spent their whole life being the absolute best at what they do. And then they win a championship, and in the moment, there's this excitement of holding up the trophy and being the best and winning. But it doesn't take long for that to fade away. And for those people to go, is that all there is? I mean, I thought oftentimes they say, I thought it was going to be so much more than this. And honestly, what that leads people to, what ends up happening is people become depressed. People become, saddened by that fact. Kathy Hawkins here says, never seen a U-Haul following a hearse to the cemetery. I mean, yeah, that's that's kind of what Solomon was talking about. You leave it all behind. But I want you to think about this question for just a second. Can you think of some biblical examples of people who wanted to die or wished they had never been born? Because sometimes that happens to people even in our world, and I think it was happening to people in Solomon's world, that they went after the pursuit of something. When they gained that something, they found out that they still had a very empty hole in their life, and they just threw their hands up and said, what's the point? What's the point in living? What's the point in life? What are we doing here? Kathy brings up one of the ones we know for sure. Job was one of those people who just, he just wished he'd died, wished he'd never been born. There are multiple examples. I have at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them written down. See if you can think of some other ones of people that's see if people can come up with some other ones. I'll give you a minute to think. Job would be the first one that popped into my mind. Adam mentions another one. Elijah said it as well. Here's another one. He was two of the five that I have written down. Can you think of any other people that were like, you know what, I just wish I would die. I wish I'd never been born. Job and Elijah are two of the five that I have written down. I'll give you another one. Jonah was the same way. And Jonah was really strange, right? God had used Jonah to reach the people of Nineveh, and he just wanted to die. He didn't like that at all. Kathy Hawkins brings up another one. Moses said that as well. Moses, Elijah, Job, Jonah. The other one that I have written down is Jeremiah. Terry Cross jumps in here with Jonah as well. Jeremiah is another one. Now, these are some biblical examples. We've seen this reality play out in life with people going, what is life? Why are we living life? I've even accomplished many of my goals in life, and it still feels empty. Why do you think that people, I actually think I have it, here's the question. Why do you think people get frustrated with life or see it as futile? Because people, there are people out there who have goals, they have ambitions, they work hard, they pursue those goals and ambitions. Oftentimes, they can check the boxes of all the things they want to accomplish. By the world's standards, they would be considered very successful, yet oftentimes still seem to become frustrated with life and at times feel like it is futile, like what's going on here? Katie Miller says because they're not saved and don't know the real purpose of life. Kathy also says, Kathy Hawkins says, following a plan that isn't God's path. I appreciate both of you tuning in here and saying these things, because the very first thing I have written down there is part of the reason they feel like life is futile is because they have no real lasting purpose. And we're actually going to talk about following God's plan and following God's will for life. I did see that I missed it, but Emily chimed in and said Daniel is like 30 seconds to fall asleep. So take Emily's 30 minutes, Daniel's 30 seconds, and we're starting to squeak closer to that 7-minute. But I think you guys are hitting it here. When this happens, when people set out to accomplish something, set out with plans, set out with goals to do it, and then accomplish those things and still feel empty, you know what life becomes in their mind? Life becomes, again, this giant mystery that just can't be solved. They again look at life and go, this world and this life doesn't make any sense. It's an absolute mystery to people. And in chapter 6, that is what Solomon is looking at. We're going to look at 3 mysteries that Solomon deals with in Ecclesiastes chapter 6. Mysteries that people have in this life. It just boggles the mind for many people. The first one is this, okay? And hang with me because we're going to read God's word. I'm going to ask some questions as we go along. But the first one is this, and he's hit on it already in chapter 5. It continues into chapter 6. And the first mystery is riches without enjoyment. People that have all of the resources that the world has to offer and still not able to enjoy them. Let's read verses 1 through 6 together. It says this in Ecclesiastes chapter 6. It says, there is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men. A man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he desireth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. If a man beget 100 children and live many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and all that he have no, and also that he have no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. For he cometh in with vanity, and departeth in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. Moreover, he hath not seen the sun, nor known anything. This hath more rest than the other. Yea, though he live 1,000 years twice told, yet hath he seen no good. Do not all go to one place? So here's this man who's gained all of this money, but doesn't have an opportunity to enjoy it. He says he doesn't get to eat thereof. And he also makes mention, we'll talk about it here in just a second, he doesn't have anybody to pass his wealth down to. Now, let me ask you a question. I want you to think about this for a second. What are some things in life that can make this happen? What are some things in life, like real life things, that could happen to somebody who could potentially have wealth, but never have an opportunity to enjoy it? And by the way, we've said this already a couple times. Wealth isn't the issue, right? Having money isn't necessarily wrong. Having more money isn't necessarily wrong. However, that becoming an idol, or the thing that we chase after, or the ultimate goal, well, that becomes the problem. Having money isn't the issue. But what are some things, just practical things that happen in people's lives that where they could be in a situation where they have a lot of resources that the world has to offer. They have money, maybe they have a good job, maybe they have a lot of things going for them, but they never actually get to enjoy those things, to fully enjoy those things. Can you think of some things, some situations that may come into somebody's life that causes that to be a problem, where they never get to fully enjoy those things? Seeing if some of you chime in here. I'll give you just a little. Okay, so Kathy talks about poor health or an accident that leaves you crippled. So that's certainly one of the things I mentioned here. An emergency that might happen, some sort of disease that might happen, something like that. Cassie just mentions that sometimes they just spend so much time working that they don't ever take the time to enjoy it, right? It's the pursuit of it takes over the enjoyment of it. Sometimes, unfortunately, it's just robbed or stolen from them. So what Solomon's talking about here isn't crazy. Trouble, emergencies, disease, theft. There are a lot of things that can take it away from somebody, and Solomon is really saying that if you enjoy the gift, but not the giver, your human heart will never be fulfilled. And by the way, that's idolatry. But he's saying, hey, listen, sometimes some of you do so much of the pursuing of the gift and not enough pursuing of the giver that you'll never be satisfied. So what's the point here? Well, part of the point is don't just plan to live. And I think I'll say this, I think we should be really careful about how we handle our money. I think we should be careful about planning for the future, planning for retirement. So don't take your pastor wrong. I'm not saying don't plan for those things. But the sad reality is that there are a lot of people that spend all of their life planning for the future and not living and serving and doing what God is asked us to do now. And then, because of some sort of emergency, because of sickness, disease, death, they never reach that future that they've been planning all of this time for. And so I think part of what Solomon is encouraging us to do is to be satisfied with what God gives us now. Be satisfied with what God gives us now. Now, I want us to really quickly look at verses 3 through 6, because here Solomon gives us a hypothetical, okay? He says, if a man beget 100 children and lives many years, later on he says 1,000 years twice told, so 2,000 years. I think the math was done, I think Solomon had like 88 children, but for most people aren't going to live 2,000 years and have 100 children. But he's this extravagant hypothetical. He says, if a man begets 100 children, and lives many years, so that the days of his years be many, and his soul be not filled with good, and also that he have no burial. In other words, he has all of these resources, he has a big family, but nobody loves him. See, how do you know nobody loves him? Nobody laments him. When he says he has no burial, that means that they don't lament over his death. They're not taking, remember, burials back in this day were a big deal. And it was days, if not weeks long, that people would lament and weep and go through these things. Here he has big family, lots of resources, but nobody actually cares about him. He says, I say that an untimely birth is better than he. For he cometh in with vanity, and departeth in darkness, his name shall be covered with darkness. Now here it talks about an untimely death, and I'm not being insensitive here, but it's talking about a child that's stillborn. And it says, he cometh in with vanity, and departeth in darkness, and his name shall be covered with darkness. Oftentimes, we have to understand, in Bible times, a name would be directly connected to, like, the character of a person. And oftentimes, when a child was stillborn, that child would not be given a name. And the reasoning behind them doing that is because they thought if they gave it a name, it would be more difficult for them to kind of get over that death. But that if it didn't have a name, that the mourning process could be shortened, and it would make it a little bit easier for those people to do that. One of the things that Paul is doing here, he goes on, he says, moreover, he hath not seen the sun, nor known anything. This hath more rest than the other. Yea, though he live 1,000 years twice told, yet hath he seen no good. Do not all go to one place, and that is the grave. Solomon, once again, is reminding people that one day everybody's going to die. And as Kathy mentioned just a minute ago, you're not hooking up a U-Haul to your hearse to take with you to the grave. And Solomon, it keeps preparing everybody for the conclusion of the whole matter, right? Hey, if you're not taking everything in this life with you to your grave, I got something to tell you. It's the conclusion of the whole matter later on. So the first mystery he wrestles with here is this idea of wealth without enjoyment, right? The second one is this: labor without satisfaction. Labor without satisfaction. Now get ready, because I'm going to ask you a few questions here in rapid succession. Let's read verses 7 through 9, though. He says this. He says, all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is not filled. Verse 8. For what hath the wise more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. So on one end, Solomon is talking about the rich man who has everything but can't enjoy it. And now he goes to the opposite end of the spectrum, and he's talking about the poor man. The rich man, he has this money and it works for him. However, on the other side, the poor man has to work for his money so that he can buy food, but his appetite is never really satisfied. That's what verse 7, if you go back and look in verse 7, it says, all the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet the appetite is never filled. He labors and labors and labors and labors and labors to get money. Why? To buy food. Why? To be able to eat. Well, that person eats. Okay? Let me ask you a question, though. He kind of asks this a little bit, but I want you to think about this for a second. What is the purpose of work for the poor man? Okay, we talked about the rich man. He's making money, sometimes hand over fist, and we talked about before he could at least labor and enjoy his labor if he did it right, and all those kinds of things, and he could build things, and there are all these kinds of things. But I want you to think, and we've talked about some. I'm sure you've talked about something similar like this before. What is the purpose, practically? I'm not talking about spiritually, just practically. Why does a poor man have to work? Why not just do nothing? Why does a poor man have to work? Just practically speaking. Why does a poor man have to work? Kathy August says, a means of survival, right? The Bible tells us here, it's literally so he can put food to mouth. Now think about this. right? Cassie says it too, for survival. Um, um, Eric says it, to eat. Emily, providing shelter, food, clothing for himself and his family. Anita says to pay for his existence. I think we're all getting what's going on here. He does these things so that he can eat, so that he can live, right? So follow this with me. The poor man works to put food on his table, right? Why does he put food on his table? To make sure that he can continue to exist, as Anita puts it, right? Now, what does he need to continue to exist for? Well, so that he continue to labor. Why? So that he can get money to buy food to put on the table. Why? So that he can continue to exist and have the strength to labor. Why? So that he can get more money to buy food. Why? Why does he eat the food? To strengthen his body, to labor, so that he can make more money. It's just this, for the poor man, it really is just this vicious cycle. Somebody one time said animals' lives are basically made up of two things: looking for food and avoiding enemies. That's what an animal does. An animal spends their life looking for food and avoiding enemies. Do you realize that's not really living? That's just existing. That's just existing. It's not really living, if that's all you do. Now, I want you to understand again, there's nothing wrong with working. And there's nothing wrong with eating. But if life only consists of those things, Solomon is saying, man, we're a lot like animals. That's it. So here we come to verse 8, okay? And I'm going to read verse 8 here really quickly. Let's see if I can find it. Verse 8 says, "For what hath the wise more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living?" You know, I was thinking about this question. I'm going to ask a couple more questions here in a second. What good is it to labor to add years to your life if you don't add life to your years? And again, these are kind of these existential questions that Solomon is wrestling with. He's looking at people all over the world and saying, man, and again, I say it again, these are some of the same questions that people wrestle with today. What's the meaning of life if all I'm doing is working to put food on the table so that I can keep living? And so many people focus on adding years to their life and forget about adding life to their years. Okay? And so he comes and he asks this question again. What hath the wise more than the fool? What hath the poor that knoweth to walk before the living? In other words, this. If all you do is live to satisfy your appetite, what advantage do you have over the fool? What good does it do for the poor to improve to be like the rich? If that rich person or the poor person who becomes rich doesn't get to enjoy his riches. And the answer is there is no advantage. Okay? There isn't any advantage. Now, again, I don't want you to mistake what I'm saying here. Solomon is not demeaning education. Solomon is not demeaning self-improvement. Okay? None of those things is he demeaning. But neither of those things in and of themselves make life genuinely richer. We must have something greater for which we live. That's what Kathy Hawkins is mentioning here. She says both the rich and the poor can serve God and others if they look outside of their own existence. That's exactly right, right? So here is the thing. There's nothing wrong with trying to grow wiser, with getting an education, with improving your position or your lot in life, as long as those things aren't the ultimate goal, because they will never satisfy you. We must have something greater for which we live, which brings me to verse 9, okay? And I'm going to ask you a question about verse 9. Verse 9 says this: "Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit." Here's my question. Or here's what I want you to do. Put verse 9 in your own words. Matter of fact, we have in our English language, we have an axiom, we have a saying that is very similar to this. Let me see if anybody can come up with it. Look at verse 9 again. Put verse 9 in your own words, but here it is again, especially the first part. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. Again, we have an English axiom that goes along with these that is very similar to this. But you can also put it in your own words. Think about it for just a second when you read verse 9. What is verse 9 saying? Okay, what is verse 9 saying? I'll give you a second here. This is Solomon's version of a saying that we have in our English language that I think most of us have probably heard at some point in our lives. Again, I'll read it one more time. He says, better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. I'll give you a few more moments here, and if I don't see anybody come in with anything, I'll let you know what it is. Now, how many of you sang along or hummed along with me this time? Be honest. Here is the saying. How many of you ever heard this? A bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. A bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. Right? There you go. Terry just came in. So I'm having. I believe that Terry is typing that out as I was saying it. So a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Go back and look at verse 9 again. He says this: better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. Right? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the desire. Better is a bird in the hand, possess something, to have something, than to have two in the bush as potential. In other words, Solomon is saying this: better to have a little bit and enjoy it than to dream about a lot and never get it. Again, it's important for us to clarify. That doesn't mean that big dreams are wrong. He's just saying, just be careful not to let ambition control you. Even our ambition must be motivated by the glory of God. Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 6, he wrote these words. He says, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Katie says it's better to get something you desire than to be wanting. Okay? Yeah, it's better to have just a little bit and enjoy that little bit than to always be desiring something else. And again, ambition, big goals aren't wrong as long as they're motivated by the glory of God and not by the praise of men. And so here are two kind of mysteries in life that he's dealt with, right? Riches without enjoyment, labor without satisfaction. Because if you just labor to reach this point on the ladder, once you reach that point in the ladder, you're not going to go further. It's never going to completely satisfy. But having a desire to please and honor God, having a desire to serve other people, having a desire for the glory of God, those things will satisfy. They will ultimately satisfy. Now, the third mystery he deals with is this: questions without answers. And here is where he ends the chapter. Look at verses 10 through 12. That which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man. Neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, but what is man the better? For who knoweth, notice those words, who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow. For who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? Up to this point, Solomon has dealt with life being empty for two types of people: the rich people who can't enjoy it, and those who labor with no satisfaction. Now, here's the truth. Listen to me carefully, okay? This is important. I'm going to show it here to you, okay? If you devote your life to the pursuit of happiness, you will end up being miserable. If you devote your life to doing God's will, you'll find happiness along the way. If you, because we end up defining what happiness is. This is what happiness is, and if I reach that, everything will be great. And the pursuit of that leaves us miserable because we can never grasp at it. We can never fully get hold of it. But if you devote yourself to doing the will of God, you will find happiness along the way. Solomon, to some instance, says that life appears to be this dead-end street for one other kind of person. And that is a person who requires an answer to all of life's questions. And now, not all of us this way, but there are some people that they don't struggle with riches and enjoyment. They don't struggle with labor without satisfaction, but they struggle with this. They need an answer to every question. Now, once again, don't be confused. Solomon is not condemning honest inquiry. He's not condemning the asking of any questions. But we also have to come to the reality that there are some questions in life that just can't be answered. Okay? That just can't be answered. I actually have this written here. I want you to think about this for a second. Some questions in life cannot be answered. And I have two questions. What does that lead some people to? Some people look at life, they have questions that they just cannot answer. What does that lead some people to? The follow-up question, though, is this. What should it lead believers to? Think about this for a second, okay? Living in a world, which we do live in a world, where there are a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. Where does that lead some people to? What mindset does that lead some people to? And the follow-up question behind that is, what should it lead the believer to? What should it lead the believer to? Think about it for a second. I'll wait for your answers here. And then when we close out tonight, we'll look at some of those questions that Solomon wrestles with in verses 10 through 12 as we close out tonight. Again, the reality is there are some questions in life that cannot be answered. What does that lead some people to? What kind of attitude? Okay? Emily says it leads to mistrust, that there's no truth. But what it should lead us to is to faith and contentment. And that's right. When there are questions without answers, oftentimes that leads people to skepticism. There just can't be any truth, right? There just can't be any truth. They're so skeptical. It leads to unbelief, which when you have skepticism and unbelief about this world, it leads to what Kathy just mentioned there, just this giving up. But what it should lead the believer to is, as Emily mentioned here, faith. Just because you don't have all the answers to life doesn't mean there's not an answer to the questions. And just because God hasn't given you the answer to those questions doesn't mean there isn't an answer. And just because you can't make sense of what's going on doesn't mean that it doesn't make any sense. But for many people, if they can't get an answer to everything, it leads to skepticism and unbelief. But God desires for that to lead us instead to faith. We have to come to grips as believers that we don't live by explanation on everything. We live by faith. Okay? Now, when you think about this for a second, explanations don't really solve problems. We think if we just had all the answers, solve all of our problems, everything would be taken care of. But think about this for a second. Let's say you're going through some sort of sickness. You find out you have some sort of disease. Okay? They take an x-ray, they show it to you, they explain it all to you. You now have an explanation for what's going on inside that was mysterious to you. But that explanation, guess what? That explanation doesn't bring healing. Now, it's an essential step towards recovery, but the explanation itself doesn't bring recovery. Sometimes we get this mistaken thought that if we just had all the answers. Katie brings up a good point. It also leads people to go to these anti-biblical, anti-God places, and they'll even believe false or made-up answers, right? Just so they can feel some sort of comfort of having an answer. And so that's a good point to bring up as well. But understand, even if we had explanations, doesn't mean all our problems we solved. That comes, as Katie just mentioned here just a minute ago, is a deeper, abiding relationship with the Lord. Now, really quickly, I want us to look at just a few as we close out here. Some questions that Solomon wrestled with. Ready? Here we go. The first one was this: since what's going to be is going to be, why bother to make decisions? Look at verse 10. Okay. That which hath been is named already, and it is known that it is man. That which hath been is named already. So the question he wrestles with is, hey, if what's going to be is going to be, then why bother to make decisions? Okay? Why wrestle with that? And he goes on again and he says this: that which hath been named is already, and it is known that it is man. In other words, that which is named is that which hath been is named already. In other words, that it's the idea that, hey, man is man, light is light, no matter what other people say. This is the reality. You and I cooperate with God as we accept the names that He has given things. This is important. Sin is sin. Obedience is obedience. Truth is truth. Right? And when we alter these, we create a world of illusion. We lose touch with reality. Okay? So I do believe that we are free to decide. We're free to choose our world. But we are not free to choose the consequences. The reality is people can call sin by some other name. They can redefine man. They can redefine marriage if they want to. They can live in that world. But they do not get to choose the consequences of making those changes. Okay? So that's one of the things that is important for us to understand. Another question that he wrestles with is this: why disagree with God? We can't oppose Him and win, can we? Again, at the very end of verse 10, he says this: neither may he contend with him that is mightier than he. Right? But here is the misconception that this gives. This idea of why even disagree, why wrestle with God, why contend with Him. It gives the impression that the will of God is something to be avoided. Right? That I'm going to wrestle with God. I really wish He'd give me what I want. I'm just going to, from a pastor's heart, let me give you a warning. According to Romans chapter 1, us getting what we want might be the worst thing in the world for us. So be careful about that. I don't think God is threatened when we question or when we wrestle with Him, so long as we love Him and have a great desire to please Him. And our desire is not so much to get our way, but to find out what His will is. A third question that Solomon wrestles with: what do we accomplish with all our words? Does talking solve problems? Look at verse 11, I think it is. Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? Are we really improving, by discussing all of these things? Sometimes the more we discuss an issue, the less we seem to understand it. Sometimes, rather than bringing light to a situation, it actually increases the cloudiness of the situation. And this is where we need the Word of God more than anything else, because it is light. It is truth. Okay? Seeing there be many things that increase vanity, what is man the better? You know what makes man better? The Word of God, the truth of God. Okay? Another question he wrestles with. Who knows what is good for us? Look at the verse again. For who knoweth what is good for man in this life? All the days of his vain life which he spendeth as a shadow. You know what the answer to that is? You know who knows what's good for man in this life? God does. God does. Wise is the person who listens to what God has to say. Wise is the person who listens to God and what he has to say, because he knows what is good for man in this life. Last question he wrestles with. Okay, does anybody know what's coming next? I just read an article today about Bill Nye the Science Guy, who claims he has definitive proof that there is no afterlife. This is a question that's been wrestled with almost since the beginning of man. Solomon wrestles with it here. Does anybody know what's coming next? Look again at the end of verse 12. He says, for who can tell a man what shall be after him under the sun? But I want to close with this verse, or with this thought tonight, and is this. Nobody knows the future but God. He knows the future. One thing is sure, death is coming, and we better make the best use of our present opportunities. We better make the best use of our present opportunities. God knows the future. I don't know the future. Death is coming. I know, even in the getting to know you question, wasn't something we wanted to think about, but the reality is it's coming. Okay? And so we better make the best use of our present opportunities. Whether that's wealth, okay, whether that's labor, whether that's knowledge, the best use of our present opportunities is to use those things for the glory of God. Okay? For the glory of God and for the encouragement and help of other people. At this point, Solomon has dealt with the monotony of life. He's dealt with the futility of wealth. And life can at times seem monotonous and empty, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be if we include God in our lives. Life is God's gift to us. Yes, it's going to seem monotonous. It's going to seem empty. It's going to seem worthless without God. This is Solomon's point over and over again. Again, the conclusion of the whole matter. Remember the conclusion of the whole matter. If you don't, go back and read chapter 12. We'll get there soon in life. Okay? Next week, when we come back, Solomon will deal with the vanity of man's wisdom. Man's wisdom. And whether or not wisdom makes life any better. Because up to this point, he's gone, well, wealth that can't be enjoyed doesn't make life better. Labor that never satisfied doesn't make life better. Questions with no answers doesn't make life better. And now he's going to look and see whether wisdom makes life better. And we'll look at that with him in the coming weeks. Couple closing comments here. Yeah, Terry Cross says, verse 11 sounds like a theme verse for Congress. Fair enough. That is very true. I'm going to... And Kathy Hawkins says, don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today. And I think that's a good point. Because, so many of us talked about, well, I'd rather know when I'm going to die rather than how I'm going to die so that I can do these things as that time comes closer. But here's the thing. We don't know. All we know is death is coming. So let's make the best use of the opportunities God gives us today. Because tomorrow and the next day and the next day aren't promised. So all of those things you said, hey, if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, I'd do them. If it's within your means, and it's possible. And it can be done to the glory of God. It can be done to the glory of God. You're not promised tomorrow. Okay? You're not promised those things. Live with the reality of eternity in mind. And what that does is it helps us to remember that, hey, money isn't the end all. Labor isn't the end all. Having all of my questions answered isn't the end all. But living a life to the glory and honor of God. Now that's something worth living for. That's something with eternal merit and eternal purpose. So I want to encourage you, as I do every single week, and as we end, no matter what you have going on in this life, until then, say until when? Well, until the next time we see each other. Until then, until when? Until Jesus returns. Until then, until when? Until you draw your last breath. You know what I'm going to tell you to do? Keep looking up. Keep looking up. Because when we look here, we look down, we get swamped, and we get pushed down by the things of this world. When we keep our eyes up on the Lord, it keeps our focus upward on Him. It keeps us gazing towards Him. A reminder that this life is for Him, that it's not about all of these things down here. It's about what's up there, that's where my aim is going to be. That's where I'm looking. That's what I'm aiming for. And it's going to continue to give us real, genuine purpose and aim in life. So again, until then, keep looking up. Thanks for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you again next week. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. Lord willing, we can see you on Sunday as we have the Fitches, which are going to Spain. And we look forward to continuing Missions Month this week. Looking forward to it already. A couple things, actually, before we leave here, that I want to make you aware of. Some of you may have already signed off. Hopefully you didn't. But if you didn't, just a couple of things I want to make you aware of. First of all, we got some Easter invitations in, which we will have at the back table of the church. Let me encourage you to give these out wherever you go. It has all the Easter details in the back, things we're doing, like the free family photos, coffee and donuts and fruit, Easter egg hunt, all those kinds of things in there, so be sure to pick those up. Also, I just want to remind you of this as well. If you have filled out one of your Invite Your One, I'm inviting cards, please turn those in. You can drop those in the giving box. You can give those directly to me. We do have plans for those, and we want to make you aware of those as well. But again, we look forward to Missions Month, this continuing next week with the Fitches. I talked to him about his Sunday night, and got some interesting things planned. I think a neat object lesson about sharing the gospel that he has planned, possibly even playing the guitar and teaching us to sing in Spanish, which would be kind of an interesting thing to do as well. And so I hope you can join us for that. Again, thank you guys for joining us this week. Again, until next time, keep looking up. We'll talk to you guys later, and I hope you have a great rest of the week.